Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
How y'all doing?
Morning.
Well, is the election close enough for you? Is that providing enough entertainment and drama? Maybe we'll know by tomorrow. Who knows? But whichever way it goes, guys, take it with grace and dignity. If your side loses, you know, it's okay to feel bad for a couple hours, but then it's time to move on. What you don't do is allow yourself to fall apart emotionally, or certainly don't go and burn down the city. So the good news is that we've got 3 branches of government, and it's you know, that keeps the extreme policies out of the way pretty much. And with those 3 branches, we can survive just about anything. We survived Bush, we've survived Obama, we survived Trump, and we will survive Trump again, and we'll survive Biden. So whatever it is, it's going to be morning. It's going to be morning tomorrow, and it's going to keep being morning. So life goes on. Okay, well, unemployment. We've got to we're going to wrap that up today, and then we're going to start looking at the money in the banking system. So let me see if I can get this thing going. I forget how to use it each time a little bit. Okay, let's get, oh, here we go. Yeah. All right, so here, well, I better use my right hand. Can you see my screen that I'm drawing?
Yep.
Okay. Phew. All right, here's the wage rate. Here's the quantity of labor. Here's the supply of labor. That's us. And here's the demand for labor. That's employers. Here's the equilibrium wage, and it's at this wage. That means the market is clearing. That means there's no unemployment. Quantity supplied and quantity demanded are equal. So there's no excess supply of labor. That, again, means everybody who wants a job at that wage rate has one. So what if we decide, as a society, government says, we are going to set a wage right there that cannot go below that? Okay, that's a price floor. Can't go below. Well, if the price floor is set above equilibrium, we call that a binding price control, or in this case, binding minimum wage. And we will see quantity demanded fall at that higher wage. And we will see quantity demanded, quantity supplied increase. Well, I didn't give myself much room. So you have more people interested in working at the higher wage. They were full-time students or homemakers or whatever. Grandma and grandpa, not interested at the lower wage, but at the higher wage, you know what? I'll throw my hat in the ring. Now here's the thing. With the higher wage, hours are going to be cut. If it's a binding minimum wage. I can't emphasize that enough. If the minimum wage is down here, below equilibrium, then nothing's going to happen. So who are you going to lay off first if you're a business owner? You're going to lay off your most productive workers or your least productive workers? Well,
Least productive.
Yeah, that's a kind of almost a dumb question, isn't it? Who is the minimum wage designed to help more than anyone else? The least productive workers. They're the ones that need the most help getting in the labor force, the most help getting going. They're really the ones you have your eye on because they're the least likely to move on and upward. But on the other hand, they're the first to go. So the minimum wage, if it's a binding minimum wage, is often going to hurt the very people you're trying to help. Well, let's watch this little thing about that. It's called Why $15 Minimum Wage Could Hurt Those It's Meant to Help. Here we go. Do you see this?
New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and several other areas have been approving big hikes in the minimum wage. But what if those hikes might actually hurt some?
Hold on, I forgot to share the sound. Okay, here we go. Share computer sound. And I always thought this optimized share for full screen video clip, I thought that made it so you couldn't see me. You can still see me, right?
Yep.
You
Yeah.
can't. Jeez. See, I don't want to be seen. I want you to watch the video, not me. Am I? Okay, am I in the way of the video?
Not at all.
No. Good. Where am I?
It's kind of off the side.
I'm off
The
the
bottom right-hand corner.
bottom right. Okay. Okay. Because I can't see me. I don't see where I'm here. Oh, I'm going to see if I can get rid of me here in a minute. But anyway, here we go.
New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and several other areas have been approving big hikes in the minimum wage. But what if those hikes might actually hurt some of the people they're meant to help? Joining me now is Douglas Holtz-Eakin. He's president of the Center-Right American Action Forum, which is out with a study today that finds that might just be what's happening. Doug, thanks for joining us. Why don't you describe the work you've done here looking at the minimum wage if it goes up to different levels?
Sure. Thanks for having me on. We did this work with the Manhattan Institute, and the idea was to take it at face value, these proposals to raise the minimum wage to, say, $12, or in the New York City, LA case, $15. And to analyze it, we did really two things. Number one, we went out to the literature and said, who's worked on minimum wages and the impacts of raising the minimum wage. We started with work done by the Congressional Budget Office. We looked at some other studies that show more dramatic impacts. And then we went to the data and just literally looked at who will be affected. So, for example, if you raise the minimum wage to $15, there are going to be 55 million workers who are going to see their wages affected, either because they're going to be bumped up to 15, or they're making between the current minimum and 15, and they're going to get bumped up as well. And then, what happens after those people get affected? And I think the really striking results are that, for example, with the $15 minimum wage, yes, 55 million people are affected, but 6.6 million people lose their jobs. And of the $100 billion of income that's generated by forcing the wages up, only 6.7%, so about $7 billion, ends up going to people in poverty. So the story is one that says, yeah, you can raise the minimum wage, but it's going to cost people jobs, and it's not going to solve the poverty problem. So why are we doing this?
So basically you're saying that there are some people who benefit because they get higher pay, but this also makes employers more likely to hire fewer people, and those are the people who end up left out?
Absolutely. So it's a very strange story if you think through it. We have somebody who otherwise would have been hired, they don't get a job. The person who keeps their job gets a raise. So we've essentially taken the money from someone who's out of work and given it to someone who has a job. It doesn't really strike me as the right way to redistribute income in the U.S.
Now, the reason that would happen would be that businesses would just say, okay, we have to have some workers and we have to pay what the law says we have to pay, but they would find ways to basically employ fewer people just because their labor costs would go up, right?
Absolutely. Labor costs are higher, and over the longer term, they try to find ways to permanently scale down their labor force. So they're going to automate where they can, have people check themselves out where they can, do things like that.
Okay, now in fairness, I mean, we have to point out there are some studies that say the effects would maybe not be quite as dramatic, and this is a net gain. But this is actually, these are not theoretical wage hikes. These are actually going into effect in a lot of different places, not at the federal level, but state and local. So are you suggesting that we are going to see these sort of negative economic consequences in those areas, New York, Seattle, Chicago, Washington, D.C., places where these wage hikes have actually gone into effect?
I think that should be a real concern. Yes, there are studies out there that suggest smaller impacts, but we chose a range in the paper. We didn't try to sort of play games with this and find the most dramatic impact and use that. The only thing we ruled out is actually increasing employment from the minimum wage. There have been a couple of studies that assert that's true. I think those really don't stand up. The second thing I'd worry about is if you're raising it in a place like New York City, which is already a relatively affluent, high-wage area, it has a smaller impact than if you raise it in some place that is far less affluent. If you go out to a Santa Fe or some small town in the South. So the impacts will differ depending on where you are, but the real question is, why are you doing this to begin with if you're not going to solve a poverty problem? This is always advertised as we need to help the middle class, we need to help low-wage workers. The money's not going where we want it to, so it would seem to be better to do some sort of other approach that subsidizes the wages of people who are working and targeted poverty. That's what the Earned Income Tax Credit does, for example. We could work off that. I've got a proposal for a wage that if you work full-time, you're never in poverty. There are better ways to do this than the minimum wage.
Okay, Douglas Holtaken, thank you for joining us. Folks, let us know what you think in the comments section below, or find us on Twitter at Yahoo Finance.
Well, reason I'm going through this, as you recall, we talked about the structural employment. When calculating the natural unemployment rate, we are, there we go. Yeah, there we are. When calculating the natural unemployment rate, which is the sum of structural and frictional unemployment, right? And the determinants of structural unemployment, well, minimum wage was one. When you place a barrier here and you increase quantity supplied to workers and decrease quantity demanded, that creates unemployment. We call that structural unemployment. Now, the other determinant of structural unemployment is unions, can be. Not as big a factor in the economy these days as it has in years past, but they essentially do the same thing. Now with unions, the difference is that unions are usually comprised of very highly skilled workers. And, you know, if you can band together, you wield some power, and you can threaten a strike. You say, give us a little extra, or we go on strike. And so the company has a choice. They can incur the extra cost of raising the wage up, you know, a certain amount, or they can incur the cost of a strike. Either way, they're going to pay a cost. So a strike's going to cost them money. Raising their wages of their employees is going to cost them money. So, to the extent the union can kind of muscle their way into a higher wage, that's going to have the same effect. You're going to have more people, of course, entering the market wanting to work for that company or for that union or companies that union applies to. And of course, the company is going to figure out a way to lower their labor costs by maybe hiring fewer workers or cutting hours or something. So you've got this same thing, you got this gap, and that's another determinant of the same analysis. You're pegging the wage above equilibrium, creating some structural unemployment. Now, in this little video here, it talks about some of the history of this relationship between labor and management, unions. And in the early going, unions provided a tremendous benefit. I mean, working conditions were really bad, long hours, bad conditions, and unions stepped in to help clean that up. Since that time, those things have been pretty much just included in our legislation. So in one way, or in one respect, unions have been too successful for their own good. They got all these changes done, and once they were done, they weren't as necessary as they were in the early years. Now the video goes on and talks about times where maybe the union flexed too much muscle and you know, put some companies under. Okay, and another case study where they clearly saw the writing on the wall, the financial statements, made it clear that they better cooperate. So anyway, here's a little bit about this history between labor and management. You guys still with me? Okay. Just making sure I'm just not, going off the rails.
Dude, yeah, Mr. Ford, we're here, man.
Are you there?
We're still
Dude,
here.
yeah, bro. For
Yes.
We're all there. You can see my screen where it says labor and management.
Yep.
Okay, just double checking. Okay, here we go.
Oh wait, we can't see that screen.
You cannot. Okay, hold on. Thank you for telling me. Let's see, doggone it, where? It says your screen, my screen sharing is paused. What the heck? Now can you see it?
Yep.
Labor and management?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Thanks.
They were immigrant garment workers, uneducated, unskilled, and underpaid. How could they fight for a living wage? For 40 years, United Auto Workers presidents Walter Reuther, Leonard Woodcock, and Douglas Fraser won higher pay for their members. Why in 19...
Okay. Well, that rarely happens.
and underpaid. How could they fight for a living wage? For 40 years, United Auto Workers presidents Walter Reuther, Leonard Woodcock, and Douglas Fraser won higher pay for their members. Why, in 1979, would Fraser agree to take less?
Walmart. For consumers, a low-price paradise. For workers, a low-wage existence. Why is there such a disparity?
Employers and labor unions, like buyers and sellers in the rest of the economy, trying to make the best deal for themselves. Labor and management, how do they come to terms? With the help of economic analyst Richard Gill and Nariman Baravesh, we'll examine that question on this 21st century edition of Economics USA. I'm David Shoemaker.
Fewer than 1 out of every 3 American workers is covered by a union contract. But organized labor's strength at the economy's pressure points, the big smokestack industries, the arteries of transportation and communication, make them a force to be reckoned with. For more than 75 years, labor unions have been a fact of American economic life. But how did they get their power in the workplace and in the economy? We are a nation of immigrants, and never did more people come to the United States than around the turn of the century. Millions, most of them Jewish or Italian, unskilled and uneducated, settled in New York City's crowded tenements. What kind of work did the land of opportunity offer these new arrivals? Fanny Susskind remembers.
We came here with the needle in our hand. I worked since 12 years old when I came here.
Union newspaper editor Leon Stein.
So that the history is one of a sequence of newcomers to America who stepped foot into America and into the sweatshop almost simultaneously. It was a cesspool of disease. Lint and dust in the air, darkness or inadequate lighting, crowded machinery, dirt on the floor, men and women stripped to the waist, bending over the pressing boards and over the sewing machines with children lolling about, and it was a scene out of hell.
Joanne Argersinger, professor of history at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County.
These sweatshops that emerged in the late 19th century really came about because of the structure of the industry. There was a chaotic industry, it was intensely competitive, and there were a large number of workers, particularly women and immigrants, who were easy prey for many of the employers.
Stiff competition and narrow profit margins gave employers a powerful incentive to get their labor as cheap as possible. The employers had the jobs the immigrants needed, and they had millions to choose from. Was there any way these young girls could even the odds? It started with the shirtwaists, a kind of blouse whose nationwide popularity turned the women's garment industry from hand stitching to mass production.
With the advent of the shirtwaist, you began to get factories, big assemblies of workers, where up until this time, workers didn't know each other. They feared each other. How much is he asking for the work? And in one apartment, how much is he asking in the work in another apartment? Now they were all on one floor. And because they could talk to each other, even though they were forbidden, they got to know this is the prelude to organization.
The International Ladies Garment Workers Union, the ILG, started in 1900. But it took the immigrants, unsure of themselves and their new country, almost 10 years for dissatisfaction with low wages and bad working conditions to burst into flame.
There was no use asking the boss for a raise. He used to laugh at you. We would ask for a raise. In piece work, when we used to work, it used to be at waste.
The year was 1909.
The word had spread, a notice had been issued that there will be a meeting of all the shirtwaist makers in Cooper Union on November the 22nd. And at that point, a little girl, that's the way it's generally told, a frail youngster, raised her hand and she said, I want to say something. And they lifted her up to the platform. And she said, I've heard enough talk. I am one of those. She worked in Diamond Waist Company. She says, the time has come for us to have a general strike. And Benjamin Feigenbaum stepped forward against the applause and said, do you mean it? Do you mean it? He said. And if you mean it, raise your right hand and take the ancient Hebrew oath. And it was out of the Psalms. May this right hand wither if I betray the cause. May my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth.
Let's put a stop to the sweatshop. Good. Let's end the evil of the age. That's it. Fight to the finish to win the war we're waging for a decent living wage. Fight. Must be so and so need to survive. So low, so and so can cry. No! He'll cry in Hades if it's up to the ladies. Wastemakers Union Local 25.
And then, after 3 months of closed factories and picket lines, in mid-February of 1910, a compromise. The strike was settled. The workers had won 12 to 15% raises, a closed shop, a 52-hour week, and something else, a role in setting their own wages and conditions. How could New York garment manufacturers afford the better wages and conditions the wastemakers' strike had won?
The larger inside shops could, in fact, afford to give larger wage increases because they produced year-round. Most of the times they weren't affected by the seasonality. They had more of a standardized relationship with the textile firms that provided them the raw materials. And all these sorts of factors allowed them to give wage increases. And also in the larger shops, the wage increases would be immediately reflected in the price increases in the garments.
The wastemakers had made their point. If one worker asked for a raise, she could always be replaced with someone else willing to work for less. But workers bargaining together and, if necessary, striking together could win a share of the fruits of higher prices and higher productivity. The unions had made them strong. We asked economic analyst Richard Gill how the ILG used the supply and demand for labor to get wage raises.
Certainly, one important impact of the union was on working conditions, which were sometimes quite intolerable in those days. Unions, of course, also had an impact on wages. To analyze their effect, you have to compare wage determination according to the ordinary laws of supply and demand with wage determination when unions intervene. Basically, without unions, wages would be determined by the intersection of the business firm's demand curve for that particular kind of labor and the supply curve of such labor. This demand curve reflects two things: consumer demand for the product, garments, these firms are producing, and the productivity of the labor employed, roughly how much each added laborer will contribute to increased garment production. The supply curve reflects the availability of this particular kind of labor and the willingness of workers to supply their labor at various wage rates. Supply and demand are equated at this intersection of the two curves. We get an equilibrium wage here and the quantity of labor that will be employed here. Now, in the case of the garment industry at the turn of the century, what you had was an enormous availability of cheap immigrant labor willing to work at virtually any wage in order to survive. What this meant technically is that you had a supply curve of labor that looked like this. At this very low wage, businesses could hire a virtually unlimited amount of labor. Naturally, they had no motive or need to pay higher wages. They would operate here. Now, what the ILG did, in effect, was simply to insist that the wage be raised from here to, say, here. If employers objected, the union was capable of withdrawing virtually the entire labor force from the market, which, of course, is exactly what strikes attempt to do. So the employers decided to settle for this higher wage. The standard of living of the employed garment workers improved, though, of course, at a certain cost. For other things equal, when wages are raised above the market level, fewer workers will be employed. And in fact, we can see in our diagram that employment has now fallen from here to here. Few people doubt that the growth of unions had mainly beneficial effects in the early sweatshop days. Even then, however, there were some costs. In later decades, these costs sometimes became substantial.
When early labor leader Samuel Gompers was asked what the labor movement wanted, he answered in one word: more. And under the leadership of United Auto Workers presidents Walter Reuther, Leonard Woodcock, and Douglas Fraser, auto workers' wages kept pace with automakers' prices and profits.
I'm never satisfied.
You think you could have done better if you had more time?
No, but there's always more to get, but there's always a next time.
But Big Six printers have gotten more from the Herald Tribune and seen their employer go under. A newspaper or an automaker trying to turn red ink into black could cut costs by cutting pay. But why would union members who'd always gotten more take less? As America drove into the 60s, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, the so-called Big Three, dominated the auto shows and the roads. As in many of America's basic industries, lack of competition allowed the Big Three to keep raising prices. Consumers who wanted to trade up had to pay up. But the 60s brought something new to the highways. At first, American drivers and producers couldn't be bothered. 30-cent gas made gas guzzlers a cheap luxury. But the energy crisis of the 70s got the attention of American drivers. Consumers took another look at high-mileage imports. They were looking and buying. Foreign cars hit the auto industry like a cyclone. Chrysler was taking on red ink faster than it could bail it out. MIT auto industry expert Harley Shaken.
So when the oil embargo hit, they were stuck with lots full of huge Chrysler automobiles that got very poor mileage and were virtually unsellable at any price. They were making large cars when the market wanted small cars. And Iacocca, I think, when he first assumed the chairmanship or the presidency of Chrysler initially, wasn't fully aware of how dramatic the damage had been. And the early need was to get money into the company.
Where could Lee Iacocca look for the money to keep Chrysler afloat? Douglas Fraser headed the United Auto Workers.
It was 1979, and as president of the union, we'd already made a settlement in GM and Ford. And Iacocca asked to meet with me. I met with him. And he says, after all these years, we no longer can afford in Chrysler to follow the pattern that's been established in Ford and General Motors. And he laid out the economic case and it's a rather convincing case. So you're talking about the very survival of the corporation, and more important to me, much more important to me, was the survival of the workers.
Fighting for survival, union workers agreed to pay cuts, more than $450 million worth of pay cuts. But Chrysler was almost broke. What could it give the union in return?
We had to make horrendous concessions. And in those negotiations, we were able to get profit sharing. We were able to get some assurances against additional plant closings. We wanted a voice in all of the decisions that affect the lives of our members. And so they proposed to the unions a structure where the union would have a meaningful voice in all levels of management, including the board of directors.
Chrysler needed more than cost cuts. To design and build and market the small, stylish cars America wanted, it needed credit. But Chrysler's troubles had cut it off from traditional sources of credit and investment. So, like other borrowers with bad credit, Chrysler chief Iacocca asked a relative to guarantee a loan, Uncle Sam. Big business bailouts usually got short shrift from Democratic Congresses and presidents, but the UAW and Democratic leaders were old allies. When UAW Chief Fraser talked about the prospect that 500,000 jobs would be lost in a Chrysler collapse, Capitol Hill listened, and President Jimmy Carter signed Chrysler loan guarantees into law. By 1984, Chrysler was back in the black, and government-guaranteed loans were repaid.
You know, I knew how close we were to bankruptcy, but to seeing things work like that, where the government takes a hand and you formulate a constructive strategy in which all parties have to, what I call we had the equality of sacrifice.
The UAW and Chrysler were back on opposite sides of the bargaining table when contract time rolled around again. But something had changed. At Chrysler and around the country, the late 70s and the 80s saw struggling companies and their workers set aside old antagonisms in the common interest of survival. We asked one of the nation's best-known labor economists, University of Wisconsin professor Jack Barbash, were we seeing a passing phase or a basic change?
I think we're seeing a basic change. The adversarial interest was pushed too far at the expense of this narrow community of interest. And what we're seeing now from a broad analytical standpoint is some enlargement of that area of common interest, like profit sharing, like worker involvement, like quality of work, like employee ownership, illustrating the basic principle of cooperative relationships.
A business-as-usual wage increase and price hike could have sunk Chrysler. But government loan guarantees, the UAW's agreement to temporary pay cuts, and Chrysler's willingness to give the union unprecedented access to management's top councils kept Chrysler going. A union which was used to asking for more and a company which was used to giving it had discovered that staying afloat in a competitive economy could sometimes force two old antagonists to take the same tack. We asked economic analyst Richard Gill what accounts for the recent trend away from confrontation and toward cooperation.
The change is, I think, quite dramatic. The central fact is that union membership as a percentage of the American labor force has been declining for 30 years. The Chrysler case brings out one reason for the growing pressure on unions: the competition of cheaper and even in some cases more efficient foreign labor. But there has also been an enormous change in our economy from hard hat industries to service industries. White-collar workers are being organized by unions in many instances, but not on a scale to match the decline of the traditional union strongholds. Things are obviously changing. Besides foreign competition, the Chrysler story also suggests another change: the occurrence of actual cooperation between labor and management from opposite sides of the bargaining table. Does this herald the dawn of a new era in which unions and management place their common interest above their conflicts? Maybe not, Well, one can dream, can't one?
Walmart is the nation's largest retailer and one of the most profitable. It is also the nation's largest private employer with more than 1.4 million workers. Supporters praise Walmart for selling food and other goods at rock-bottom prices. Critics attack the company for paying rock-bottom wages and preventing unions from organizing. As Walmart grows and grows, who benefits and who gets hurt?
Sam Walton was already a successful retailer in 1962 when he opened the first Walmart store in Rogers, Arkansas. His timing was perfect. There was a surplus of farm labor in the region, and women lined up for jobs at the area's first superstore. Everyone knew Sam Walton with his folksy humor and small-town manners, and Walton knew the farm women would be ideal employees, unskilled wage earners grateful for income and unlikely to demand higher wages. And while Sam Walton was running Walmart, he supplemented low wages with other benefits.
Walmart, in return for lower wages, initially gave people the possibility of an equity share in the company, and over time that equity portion has been forgotten.
And a lot of early workers, people who joined Walmart in its early days actually became millionaires.
So when Walton died in 1992, was it Wall Street that caused his successors to cut the benefits and just keep the low wages?
Wall Street places lots of pressure on corporations to increase their profits, and they know that one way to increase profits is to push down labor costs.
A low-paid workforce isn't the only strategy Walmart uses to maximize profits, but it's the most controversial. How does the company defend itself?
Now, Walmart might argue that we have more than 1 million workers in the United States. They're willing to work at the rates we offer. But if you're making $10, $11 an hour and you're only working, say, 30, 35 hours a week, you'll probably end up below the poverty line of about $20,000.
Research shows that Walmart's wages are standard for the retail industry, and retail stores are one of the few places where unskilled workers with a high school education can find a job. But why do so many of those workers choose Walmart over its competitors? It seems that benefits other than wages build loyalty in the Walmart workforce.
The opportunities at Sam's Club is endless.
When I started out as a cake decorator, I never thought I'd end up as a manager today.
I have a high school diploma, and I never thought that I would be able to achieve the level that I'm at now, the income that I'm making now, and the opportunities that I've had.
For many years, unions have tried to organize Walmart's million-plus workers, promising them better wages and benefits.
Walmart made $12 billion in profit last year, but none of that reached us.
I put 10 years in Walmart and I make $11.30.
Walmart has fought hard to stop the workers from organizing, but why haven't the unions succeeded?
When the workforce was comprised largely in huge factories with 5,000 to 10,000 workers, there was this feeling of solidarity, and it made it easier to unionize places. It's much harder to unionize 33 workers at a bank or 22 workers at a Starbucks or a hair salon. So I think unions face a hard time. For the main reason the percentage of workers in unions has declined is that companies have gotten much more aggressive in fighting to keep out unions.
So, is that the end of this labor management story? Almost. There is one maverick in the retail rodeo that deserves mention: Costco, which competes directly with Walmart's membership division, Sam's Club. Costco pays its workers well, provides good benefits, and offers low prices. What's their secret?
So Jim Sinegal, the founder and head of Costco, is in ways like Sam Walton, that they're both retail geniuses. When he founded Costco, he said, paying our workers well, treating them well, they are very productive, they work very hard for us.
But does higher productivity generate sufficient profits to pay for higher wages and benefits? Or are there other factors as well?
At most retailers, the typical worker leaves after a year and a half or so. At Costco, the typical worker leaves after 5 years. You don't have to spend nearly as much money, trying to find people, advertising for people, interviewing people, training people.
You don't want all retail to try the same thing. You want someone to innovate and try a different business model and then see it successful. If Costco's correct, then their case study in the business school is going to win out over Walmart's. Let the game begin and let's see how consumers respond to that possibility.
I shop at Walmart because I like the prices, I like the selection, the quality.
I have a big family, so the volume is what I needed, a volume discount, and also quality product and the convenience.
I shop at Walmart because of the prices. They're a bit cheaper than other stores.
The quantity is big and the price is low.
Well, economically, it's a good place to shop. They have a great variety of things, and the price is right.
I'm the mother of 4 boys, and I need to buy large quantities in order to feed them.
Former Department of Labor Secretary Robert Reich said this: Walmart is doing everything they can to get their costs down, and that looks unfair. It looks awful. We don't like it. But the other side of the coin is that Walmart is providing rock-bottom prices to consumers, and we as consumers say hooray. For now, Walmart seems in little danger of having its main competitors adopt the Costco model, which leads us back to our opening question. As Walmart grows and grows, who benefits and who gets hurt? We ask that question of economic analyst Nariman Behravesh.
So who is hurt and who benefits when unions are kept out of a large company in the retail industry? The power of U.S. labor unions in the private sector has been diminishing in the past few decades. The share of unionized workers in the total workforce has fallen from 20% in 1980 to around 12%. Moreover, the retail industry is one of the few places where unskilled workers can find a job. Unionizing workers with few skills is always tough, mostly because there's so many of them in the world. Unions often succeed in getting higher wages and better benefits for their members. However, in a fiercely competitive world, this can have unintended consequences, as companies have a greater incentive to automate, substitute machines for people, or offshore, substitute cheap foreign labor for expensive U.S. labor. So keeping unions out of the retail industry can mean that wages and benefits are less generous. On the flip side, employers have less of an incentive to cut their workforce. By far, the biggest beneficiaries of low-cost retailers are consumers, especially poor ones, who by some estimates save over $2,000 a year on average by shopping at these types of stores.
The immigrant garment workers who made the ILG learned and taught the lesson that workers bargaining collectively with an employer can even the economic odds. But as other union workers found out, bargaining power is like a hammer. Swing it too hard or too wildly, and you might very well bring the whole business down around your ears. But use it carefully, and you can build or even repair a sound structure on a firm foundation. For this 21st century edition of Economics USA, I'm David Shoemaker.
All right. Costco was doing a little bit of what Henry Ford was doing with the efficiency wages. They were paying a little more, hoping to get a little more loyalty, keep workers there a little longer, save money on training costs, different approaches. So we've taken a look at structural unemployment, efficiency wages. We took a look at minimum wage and unions. So that wraps up the unemployment chapter. So, oh gosh, let's have that. How about Tuesday for that one? I don't think this one's too hard. It's not one of the harder modules or chapters. What, Tuesday good enough? Tuesday night?
Yeah.
Say aye.
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, now we're going to get started in the monetary system. The monetary system. Now, this is different than the financial system. The financial system is all about linking savers and investors, how those two come together, and in the financing of capital goods. Capital goods, goods used in production of other goods. So the monetary system, we're talking about the money and banking and inflation in the next chapter. So I've got a little presentation for that. Let's get to that and get started on our money and banking chapter. Here we go.
So what is money? Well, money is anything that...
I don't know why it always does that. Here we go.
So what is money? Well, money is anything that is generally accepted in payment for goods and services or in the repayment of debt. It can be anything. So, well, that really spreads it out. So let's, in our attempt to figure out what exactly is money, let's look at what money does. What are the things that money does? So here's the functions of money. Functions of money. Well, first of all, it's a medium of exchange. And that's usually what we think of when we think of money. It's used to pay for goods and services. It promotes economic efficiency by keeping transactions costs low. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, transactions have a cost to them. And we don't really think about it because with money, transaction costs are very low. What's the alternative to using money? Well, we can exchange goods for each other. I've got some apples, you've got some cherries. Hey, I'll trade you some apples for some of your cherries. That's called barter trade. The alternative is barter. Barter trade, let's try that again. Well, that's not very good. Barter is the exchange of one good for another. Now here's the problem with barter, and this is why all but the most backward economies, societies have developed some form of money, is because barter trade is extremely expensive. First of all, you've got to find someone who has what you want. And someone who has what you want and they at the same time want what you have. That's called a double coincidence of wants. And then you have to agree on an exchange rate. 2 apples for a pound of cherries, or 1 apple for a pound of cherries, or whatever. If I want a tennis racket and I've got basketballs, I've got to find someone who has tennis rackets who wants basketballs, or who wants my cherries or oranges. This is extremely time consuming. And all that time and effort into making exchanges could have gone into producing goods and services. So that will lower economic efficiency if you have to spend a lot of your time just finding opportunities to make trades. Okay, so again, even the most primitive economies, I guess all but the very, 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 very most primitive, have come up with some form of money. Stones have been money. You know, precious metals. In prisoner of war camps especially, cigarettes became the medium of exchange. And even those prisoners who didn't smoke sure kept their allotment of cigarettes each month. What they'd do is they'd sit on them till the end of the month, till the smokers smoked all theirs, and guess what happened to the value of their money? Went up. Okay, the smokers were willing to pay a little more for those cigarettes. Whiskey has been money. Beads. You know, there's just been all kinds of things that have been money. Well, money that has an alternative use, say a precious metal, is called commodity money. It actually can be used for something, okay? Okay, commodity money, you know, like if money, say the silver. There used to be silver in our dimes, our 10-cent dimes. But if the silver got to be more valuable for alternative uses, guess what happens to the dimes? There are no dimes left. Would you spend a dime that's worth more than a dime for the silver that's in it? No. And so they stopped putting actual silver in dimes. So, and then money, as an economy becomes more and more advanced, they go to something called fiat money. And that has no alternative uses. No alternative uses for fiat money. Fiat money is what we got today. We got these pieces of paper. What can you use those pieces of paper for other than to use, you know, as money? Well, there is no other use. And that's why we use them, is because you don't have to worry about the actual money being worth more elsewhere than its stated value. Another function of money is it is a unit of account. A unit of account, well, it's a scorekeeping mechanism. You know, you go to the store and it says Captain Crunch, $2.50, right? Right there, there's a number on there. That's a unit of account. And financial statements, you want to see what company to buy, you know, buy shares of stock. You can see how much revenue they brought in, how many expenses, and their profit. All that's denominated in money. That is money functioning as a unit of account. Now, the barter system requires many prices. Okay, I said you go to the store and you get your Crunch Berries, $2.50. Can you imagine a barter system? Crunch Berries would have to be priced in terms of every other good. It'd be, you know, a pound of cherries, 5 apples. You know, a bag of flour. You know, I mean, it's just, it have to have a price, a long, enormous list and you'd have to look up your price of what good you brought to trade. So again, extreme inefficiency with a barter system. Again, that's why virtually every society has come up with some money, even the most primitive. I said all but the most primitive, but you know what? I should state that, all the really, really, really most primitive. So even if it's stones or something else, because of the tremendous inefficiency of barter trade. Well, the other function of money, last one, it's a store of value. A store of value, meaning you don't have to spend it all today. It keeps its value. You can spend it tomorrow or next year. So yeah, there's a store of value. Now, in times of high inflation, when prices are rising quickly, it's not a very good store of value. So you know, we've all heard of the hyperinflation in Germany, and after the war, World War I, and that, which is, by the way, what helped Hitler get into power. People were desperate. They had a savior, right? All politicians are saviors. And, well, we'll talk more about that in a little bit. I think I'm getting a little, whoops, ahead of myself. But it was, we're going to cover inflation in the next chapter. So I want to leave something to talk about then. But anyway, it was going up around 1,000% per month. And that's not a good store of value. But anyway, more about that later. So, stores of value. Well, there are lots of better stores of value. Stocks, bonds, real estate, art, you know, all those things. Precious metals may or may not, you know, be better stores of value than money. But we typically, when we're looking for a store of value, we go to something like that, and rather than money. So why hold money at all if it's only a so-so store of value? And the reason is liquidity. Liquidity is the ease and speed of converting something into money. And, you know, try to take a share of stock to this grocery store. Take a stock certificate to the grocery store and try to pay your groceries with it. Tell them. You could even show them the stock price that day. You know, you say, you know what, the stock closed today. This share of stock is worth $75.27. And you could show the person at the checkout, and guess what? They're not going to take it. So you're going to have to convert that share of stock into money, into a medium of exchange, so you can go to the store. Okay. Now, stocks are fairly liquid in stocks that trade on the New York Stock Exchange. Lesser markets, maybe not so liquid, over-the-counter markets, some of those. Real estate, not very liquid. You know, you don't want to have to liquidate your house to be able to go and buy some groceries. That's just not a very, very wise thing to do. So, we all need some liquidity, so we're going to hold some of our assets in the form of money. Okay, well, now that we've covered what money does, okay, or what it is and what it does, yeah, it's stuff that, medium of exchange, that's what it does. It's a unit of account, it's a store of value. Now we're going to figure out what is money. What do we have floating around out there that we consider money? And so we're going to focus on the things that money does in figuring out what is money. Now, the first measure of money, we're going to focus on the medium of exchange and the most liquid things out there. And we're going to call that M1. M1. is, well, things that are M1. Currency. Okay, take out a dollar in your pocket and your quarter, and that is M1, the most liquid form of money used for transactions and so forth. And checking deposits. Well, checking deposits, often called demand deposits, because these are payable upon demand. You go to the bank and they have to give you your money. If you've got money in your checking account, they can't hold it up. They have to give it to you. So that is called a demand deposit or a checking deposit. Well, traveler's checks, so you don't see those much anymore. Traveler's checks, used to use those for traveling overseas mainly, or traveling around the country. But nowadays with credit cards, I don't think you see those much. I certainly haven't used them in ages, and I don't know if, I guess they still have them. Let's see if I learn how to talk and write at the same time. Okay. Well, that's M1. Now, for M2, our second category of money, we're focusing more on the little less liquid, little more store of value function of money. Okay? So, here's the tricky part. M2 includes M1. Remember that. It's M1 plus savings accounts. Okay. Savings accounts. You can't spend a savings account. Show the checker out at Wegmans your passbook savings account, you know, your little book there. Show them the money's in there. Good luck spending it. You're going to have to transfer money from a savings account into your checking account or whatever, or it might be done automatically. Okay, that's why it's included as money, because it's really easy to do. Okay, and money market mutual funds. Now, we talked about mutual funds in the last, the chapter on the financial system. And this is a special type of mutual fund. It invests in money market instruments. These are short-term bonds issued by the best corporations, mostly the federal government. These are treasury bonds, treasury bills, treasury notes, or AAA rated corporations will be in there as well. Very short term. And these are considered to be extremely safe, but the reason that's put in there as money is because you actually can spend these. You can write a check. Usually there's a minimum amount. You don't use it just as a regular checking account. It's usually around $250 is your minimum. So you don't pay the kid who mows your lawn from a money market checking account or money market mutual fund. But those were, are, I should say, a very important part of M2, and popular ways to store cash is in money market mutual funds, because they're very liquid and you get, higher interest than you normally would out of a savings account. And short-term certificates of deposit. Okay, these are certificates on loan where you lend money to your bank, or you deposit your money in the bank for a given term, And, you know, you lock it up, and because you lock it up for a while, these CDs are pay higher interest. And there's usually a early withdrawal penalty. So, but the short-term ones are close enough to liquidity that they are considered money. Now, anything beyond that is too far removed, too illiquid, too far removed from the medium of exchange function of money to be considered money. If we go along that continuum, well, long-term CDs, the short-term ones are in there, long-term ones are not. If you go long-term, they're considered just a little too far removed to be considered money. Bonds, a corporate bond, treasury bond, even though money market mutual funds has those in the portfolio, you can't spend a treasury bond. Again, take the treasury bond to the store and try to spend it, not going to happen. So money market mutual funds are in there because you write checks on them. Okay. And stocks, no. Again, too far into the store of value function, too far away from liquidity. So we pretty much have right here M1, the most liquid and focusing on medium of exchange. M2, it includes M1, but adds savings accounts, money market mutual funds, short-term CDs. Okay. Now the question is often asked, well, wait a minute here. I always pay with a debit card. Why aren't debit cards here? Well, because debit cards are the same as that's your checking. I mean, where's the money come from? From a debit card. It comes out of your checking account. So keep in mind that they're one and the same. How about credit cards? And the answer is a big no. They're not. Credit cards aren't money. You say, well, I use those all the time. When I go to the store, I use a credit card, then I pay, I pay it off in full. And if you do that, make sure you pay it off in full, or you're going to pay a fortune in interest and fees. It's a dangerous game, but if you do it, make sure you pay it off full amount every month on time. And that's fine if you do that. And if you don't spend more than you otherwise would. There's a lot of downfall to that, but if you play the game, just know the rules. But that's not money. Okay, that's not money. And here's why. Okay, here's you. Here's the store. And what do? You go to the store and you give them your credit card number. And the store gives you your stuff. Okay? There you are. Oh, if it only stopped there. What a great world we live in. However, the store, unfortunately, sends that credit card number over to the bank that issues the credit card, and the bank pays the store money. Okay, or they might just credit their account, probably done with a number. There we are with the unit of account function of money. Either way, same thing, same thing. And then what? Well, if it stopped there, life would still be good, right? But then the bank sends you a bill, and you need to send the bank some money, a check or whatever. Maybe you pay online. Unit of account, right? So, there you go. Credit cards are a means of payment. It facilitates transactions, but they're not money. Money is used to settle these accounts, but the credit card itself is not considered money. Okay.
All right, that's it for today. That's all I got. Well, where am I? Oh, there's the video. I'm back. Biggest life. So let's wrap up unemployment on Tuesday, and we'll continue on with money and banking on Thursday. Let's see, today's Thursday. Tuesday. This is chapter, I think it's 29. Unemployment's 28. Yeah, 29. And we'll just keep on going. Any questions? Anything? Shoot. Fire away. You guys still there?
Yeah.
Ah, good. How come I can't see anybody? Is there something I have to hit here? Oh, participants. Okay. So I'm just playing here. Got a few extra minutes. Olivia, are you there?
I'm here.
That's to start video. Start. I can't start your video, but you can start your video. Okay. Yeah, here's the training part for me. Okay, so you guys all have your videos off, and you're just leaving me hanging out here to dry all by myself. All right. Okay. Well, that's it then. I will post this. I forgot to post the last one. I'm sure you all noticed that as you tried to see it again. And yeah, a little humor there. But I will post it nevertheless. I'll post them both. And onward and upward, guys. We'll see you Tuesday. Take care.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks. You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you.